It's easy to say until you're in the situation,
and it affects
and
you
it
personally.
affects you personally. And
That's
and when it's on your doorstep, then it was a completely different story.
100% of the proceeds gained from this monetized episode will be donated to sciencesaves.org. Thanks for listening. Hello. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming back on the podcast. I have Jenna. I have Jonathan. Thank you so much for joining me. I met you through TikTok. I made a TikTok and I said, algorithm, please do your thing. Please send me people that that grew up religious, that grew up in, fundamentalist or evangelical, or any kind of background that is very more strictly religious than the typical, Baptist upbringing like I had. And Jenny, you reached out to me and you told me your story. And then a couple of emails in, you told me your story as a couple. And I just thought that was a really fantastic, like I was already interested in your story, Jenna, and then I heard your couple story and I just thought that was fantastic. And I wanted to get a chance to talk to both of you. And so here we are. So thank you for joining me. But enough of me talking. Feel free to take over and tell me a little bit about yourselves and who you are and what you do. And we'll go from there.
All right. Well, I'm Jenna. I am an author and a mental health advocate on social media. Which sounds way cooler than influencer. But I educate about mental health online, and mom, nerd, all the things.
That's great.
And I'm Jonathan. I'm a real estate agent. Awesome
bass player.
Yeah, I play bass.
That's cool. Electric or stand up?
Both.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's really cool. I'm going to ask more about that later.
Good.
So you met in church, from what I understand, and your courtship was very short, but successful. And then I heard that, Jonathan, you started deconstructing first, but weren't so public or open about it. You were just kind of doing it on your own. Tell me a little bit about that. Like, what were the first kind of signs to you where you were like, this doesn't make a lot of sense?
Yeah, it was, I was feeling kind of a disconnect, and it was kind of one of those things where, when you're in church, you're told, well, you don't always feel it, and, all this kind of stuff. So you just kind of push through it, I guess. But so I wasn't really saying anything. I was just kind of like, well, it's just a dry spell or whatever they call it. I think really what kind of started it was, I guess I can't be too specific, but there was an event in my family that my mom was always just very sure of everything that I would ask her about God or religion or whatever. She always just had a very short answer. And so I always felt confident in going to her because she was always confident in her answer. I felt like she must know. And so there was an event in our family that a major thing that was just a very importantly held belief for her. She went against in a certain situation, and seeing that was the beginning of the unraveling for me, because I was like, now wait a minute, like she's been absolutely certain that entire time, and now she's changed her opinion on that. And so like now I'm like, well, now I'm treating it more like an opinion rather than this is the way it is. And it made me just kind of look at more stuff with a little more critical thought, I guess.
Yeah. And so when she changed her opinion, was it because she was questioning the truth as well? Or was it because of like a hypocrisy type situation? Like, it's easy to say that this is how you're going to do things until it comes down to doing it.
That's right. It's easy to say until you're in the situation,
And it affects you
it affects
personally.
you personally. And
That's right.
when
Interesting.
it's on your doorstep, then it was a completely different story.
Mhm.
Interesting. And so then you were like, wait a second, I got to step back. I got to re-examine this. And where did you go from there? Did you try to talk to people in your church? Did you Google? Like, where does one go when they have those types of questions?
No, I probably did the worst thing. I just
Oh, no.
kept it all to myself.
Yeah.
And
It is, yeah.
then just kind of I don't know, I went into like a autopilot at church. I played in the worship band at church, and it was just kind of one of those things where I just started kind of just going through the motions. I would go to church, I would play in the band, and I would basically tell everybody I was doing amazing and blessed by God and all that kind of stuff. And then I would go home and then do it all again the next Sunday. And there wasn't really I would say for the last couple years before we actually talked about it, it was just kind of a thing of I don't know. I didn't really feel any particular way about it. It was just kind of something that I did because you do it.
Yeah, I think he mentioned a couple times to me, like, the way worship is set up, it's kind of manipulative. And I was like, well, like, because now he's looking at it with fresh eyes and as part of the worship team going, wow, we're really just like messing with people.
It's like we're singing this song at this point because we know how people react to this song. And so we're gonna put it strategically in this place. Even though it wasn't like openly said, you could tell that that's what was going on. And then we're going to ramp it up and then we're going to bring it down. And then we're going to slowly bring it back up again. And it was just like, I could tell that doing that create a certain response, and kind of looking at it from the outside in almost. I was just like, I see what's happening here. It's not like necessarily the move of the Holy Spirit. It's like, just emotional manipulation.
Yeah, I never considered that the placement of the songs would be on purpose. I mean, it makes perfect sense now in hindsight. I'm like, oh my gosh, of course they would play that song before the tithe goes around. And of course they would play that song before that lesson. Wow, I never thought about that. And it's so interesting. And so when you started to think about these things, were you ever worried at any point what Jenna was going to say if you were to talk to her about it? Or were you pretty confident that you could?
I mean, I didn't have any fear of our relationship and it affecting that. But I didn't want to. I guess part of me was worried that she would worry about me. And then another part of me was, I guess, just, I don't know, just concerned we wouldn't be on the same page with it.
Yeah. And then what was like the moment for you when you realized she was getting on the same page too? And you were like, wait a second, wait a second.
Well, she started with tithe. Mm-hmm. That's where like we had always, tried to do the 10% and everything. And even when we had no money, we would really just kind of, we would put ourselves in a bad position in order to tithe because we felt like if we didn't do that, we would be in a worse position.
Yes.
And so she started researching tithe and.
Yeah. And I know we touched on this in the last episode.
Yeah.
To find out that part of the tithe was that in the Old Testament, you could buy wine and strong drink, where we in our tradition, like wine was definitely not, but certainly not strong drink. Because they're like, well, it wasn't really like strong drink was different. So what Jesus made was more like grapefruit. And seeing that this was in the tithe, that you could drink this as celebration to God, and that was your tithe. And I was like, what?
Yeah.
And that was the beginning string for me to start pulling on. And I think when I started researching on hell and sharing what I was finding about hell is when Jonathan really started like,
And I was like, oh, okay. And we
Hmm.
started having some more. So what do you think about this? And
Oh,
So,
atonement
so
theory.
what are you? What you finding over there about hell? What'd you find? Like, hey, how's it going over there? You doing? Still doing your hell research?
Exactly. Oh, you find some good stuff, huh? And I was so fired up about it because, decades of being taught this one thing and doing this research on my own and being like, this isn't even kind of biblical. Like what they're teaching isn't even in the Bible, let alone in tradition. And like so I was on a soapbox about it. Like,
yes. Yes, when that rubber band releases, man, it goes. When you're finally like, no, I'm headed in the right direction. Wait a second. There's no stopping. There's no stopping. Wow. And so when did you kind of decide together that you weren't going to go to the church anymore? You weren't going to be a part of the church? About how long in this process was that?
Well, that was really kind of interesting. So like, I think we were both, maybe I guess on the same page, or found out we were on the same page maybe around 2016, right around in that area. And then eventually we were like, okay, we need to step away from the church that we're at, and we need to try to find something different. And so we were just kind of searching for something different. We ended up landing in a church where
amazing church.
The very first Sunday that we went, the pastor was teaching us. He was doing a sermon. It was right near Easter, and he was doing a sermon he called the Red Letter series, where he was just kind of going over the words of Jesus. And then he was talking about it and just sharing things that like I've never heard any other pastor say. Like I never heard it that way before. And I walked up to him after the service and I said, listening to you makes me feel like I've been lied to my entire life. And,
wow.
And he said, I'm sorry.
I don't
know. No, it's a good thing. I was like, this is stuff that I've never heard before. And
he was deconstructing too.
Yeah, he was in the process of deconstructing. And so he was in the very beginning stages of it. And so the church went along and he was continuing to deconstruct. We were just kind of going with him in the journey. And he, the way that he did his sermons was he would give several different opinions, and he would say, there are lots of people who have studied the Bible their entire lives and are smarter than I'll ever be, and they have come to this conclusion and this conclusion and this conclusion. So it's, who's to say that, who's right? And so I'm just going to give you all of them, and then you can make the decision for yourself which one you believe is the right way. And so just even kind of being able to hold all of it loosely and look at it was really awesome. And then the pandemic happened, leading up to the pandemic.
So that was pretty recent then.
Yeah. Leading up to the pandemic, he said that same thing about hell. He was like, there are lots of Christians who have studied the Bible for years and years and years and have come up with different opinions on hell.
I think he did the atonement too.
Yeah.
From the pulpit, talking about the different atonement theories. And there was
half the church left.
Yeah. As you can imagine, there was a church split.
Wow.
Because they're like, are you saying that the Bible? And he was like, I'm saying that there are lots of ways you can look at this. And
then they were like, well, what do you believe?
Right. He was like, it doesn't matter what I believe. He would say all the time, my job isn't to my job is to make you think, not tell you what to think.
Yeah.
And so he was like, it doesn't matter what I think. And
he sounds like a brilliant man.
Yeah.
Yes, it was an amazing church. And then the church split. And as he continued to deconstruct, like
he became affirming.
Yes.
And then lost another half of the half that stayed.
Wow.
And we were down when the pandemic started. We probably had 40 people, and we had started with 600.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. And
wow.
So he was like, okay, we're not going to meet through the pandemic. And then he continued to deconstruct through the pandemic. And he told us and a few other people that were really active in the church, he said, I'm not going to reopen the church. And he said, I've been thinking about it. And he said, we are the worst nonprofit ever. He said, what other nonprofit would you give your money to that 90% went to run the nonprofit and 10% actually went to helping
Mission.
people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, I just can't in good conscience continue to do it.
Right. And we were like,
Oh.
well, of course.
Yeah.
But also we were like, there's nowhere else that we can go and find church community, because what we believe other churches would say is heretical. And like having seen that there was a way for different people with very, very different beliefs to gather together and to be community, and then watching it fall apart was just like, this is the toxic cycle that the church does. And,
Yes.
like right now we're like, yeah, no, we're good.
Yeah. And do you know if he is like still even a believer anymore? Did he go agnostic? Do you know like where his journey took him?
He I mean, he still is struggling with that, as far as like, where does he really fall, and how much does he believe? And so
I think it depends on the day you'd ask.
It probably depends on the day you ask.
I mean, he and I both, I feel that he and I both, just depends. Wow. That's not at all where I saw that story going. That's when the leader of your church is like, I have a lot of ideas and thoughts and opinions, and people are like, okay. And he's like, here they are. And they're like, whoa. All right. And then like half, like, that's just wild. But what's wilder to me is that he like didn't lose his job sooner than that. I'm glad he didn't.
Yeah.
But I'm just really surprised. I just thought, well, that would have been step one. It would have been like, get him out of here after the first, crazy, open-minded, speech that he gave. Wow. That's wild. And so I know that we talked, Jenna, last time about how you still consider yourself a spiritual person. And then Jonathan, where do you see yourself? Do you still believe there is a God? Are you spiritual? Is it one of those like day-to-day type feelings? Where do you find yourself?
So I believe that there is a God or just power in the universe as a whole. I don't know how to label it, and I don't think anybody can really for sure say this is what it is.
Right.
But we know that there's something.
Yes.
We know that there's some kind of connection and in the universe. And really what it comes down to for me is just like just seeing how important the connection is with each other, and how we're so interconnected as just human beings that we can build people up and build whole societies, or we can tear whole groups of people down.
Yeah.
And it's just and so it just, for me, it just kind of whatever Jesus was, the things that he said and the way he showed people how to care for each other, I think is something that I can hold on to and say, hey, that was a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then as a couple, how have you found that people that you've known for a very long time have kind of responded to you in this deconstruction process that you've been through? Have you lost, gained, changed, but kept? How does it look for you in terms of the landscape of like your family and friends?
All of the above.
All the above.
Yeah.
There are people we've lost, whether we wanted to or not.
And do they just like out and out tell you why, or they just kind of cut contact?
It's been a mix.
Yeah. Like I had a best friend, and we just we didn't have a connection anymore because we didn't have this shared belief foundation. And so we just drifted. There was no hard break, but we're not close anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we definitely have met new friends, especially in the deconstruction space. We've kind of found people. We are in a very conservative town.
Yes.
And so, it's like everybody's in hiding. And so you got to know somebody who knows somebody, and they're like, oh, well, they think like we do too. And it's like, oh, cool. so we're getting to know people, and we're starting to build community again, which is great. But a certain element, like even with me personally, like I can't really be like out really with how I feel about things.
Right.
Because, we went like what, 78% Republican in the last election. We have more churches per capita in our county than anywhere else in the United States.
Yeah.
We have just over 100,000 people, and we have 241 churches. And so
Wild.
it's something where like,
business.
for business, I can't, like, I just have to remain Switzerland. Like I
Right.
don't,
Right. That's a good way to put it.
if other people talk about it, I just listen and nod and, oh, okay,
Yeah.
but I just can't have those conversations publicly. But it's good to have people that I can connect with on a private.
Yeah. Yeah. And then when you do meet somebody and you start to get the feeling maybe they're on the same side, do you, like, I don't know about you guys, but I find myself testing the water. They'll be, oh, what are you doing this weekend? And I'll be like, oh, haha, not going to church. Like like, like,
exactly.
yeah, it's like a pride parade. I can't wait. It's gonna be so exciting because
Yes.
I'm inviting and I'm welcome to them. Yes. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
stuff like that where you just like, you test the waters and they agree and you're like, okay. I thought I was picking up those vibes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite ways to find the people around town is I have a couple, like pride shirts, and then I have a shirt that says, and it's April A. Joy's merch, and it says Jezebel, noun, any woman who inconveniences the church patriarchy. And if I wear that around town, I find my people, because people will be like, I love your shirt. Like
Always whispering it. They don't ever like. It's funny. They always go, I love your shirt.
Exactly. It's like, got you. So like when I'm wearing those around, the people are like, oh, safe person. Hey,
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. You either get the looks or you get the
right.
Great.
Oh,
yeah.
Absolutely.
When
the first time I wore the Jezebel shirt, that she saw it, like she's definitely afraid for our souls. She was reading it and she was being really good. She didn't say anything, but the whole time we were talking, she kept staring at my shirt.
Yes.
This shouldn't even be that concerning. This is a mild sentiment, but
Yeah, it's like, trust me, this is mild on, oh, you want me to show you some shirt? I could show you some shirts. Like I can show you and you'll be happy I'm wearing this one. I could show you. Yeah. Right. My boyfriend did not grow up religious at all, just very neutral. And at Thanksgiving, my mom looked at him and looked at me and she goes, so who's going to say the prayer? And I looked at her and she looked at me and I knew she meant like she wanted me to do it. And I go to like join hands and he just looks around and I realize he doesn't know what we're doing. He's like, and he like takes my hand. And then afterward, he like, when she walked away, he was like, what was that? He's like, why were we doing a prayer? And then I told him about the book of Revelations and he's like, people don't believe that. He's like, that's not real. Nobody believes that. And I was like, oh, trust me. We live about right down the street from like a mega church. I'm like, we're going to go one day. We're going to go. Yeah. And just see. But have you ever say that?
As long as it's not Greg Locks.
Right. Well, I told him, I was like, look, I would take you sooner, but I'm a little afraid we won't escape. I was like, I'm a little afraid they won't let us out. And I was trying to explain to him about like proselytization and how it's so important to Christians. And I said, here's the thing. He's like, why will they get mad when they find out we're not Christians? I was like, no, they'll want us to come back over and over. I was like, they'll have food. They'll give us banana bread. Like they'll do whatever they can to get us to come back.
With cookies.
Yes. They'll ask for our address.
Yes. Unless we don't respond well to that. And if we don't respond well to it, then they're gleeful about spending eternity in hell.
That's right.
Yes.
Like, you'll see when I'm up in heaven with Jesus and you're looking in from the flames, and it's like, oh, okay.
Yes.
That escalated quickly.
Absolutely. It does though. It escalates so quick where you're like, oh my. Okay. Can I still have the banana bread though? Because it does look good. It does look good.
And the little mug. Thank you for visiting.
Yeah, exactly. And once I made a joke where he said, I got something on my shirt. And he's like, oh no. And I was like, don't worry, I'm just washed in the blood of the lamb. And he's like, what? He's like, excuse, because he's also not Southern. So he has no idea what I'm talking about. I was like, so every once in a while he'll be like, are you washed in the blood? And I'm like, yeah, sure am.
That's
But you said something earlier at the beginning of the interview that I thought was interesting, where you said that your mom, Jonathan, always had a concrete answer, and you felt comfortable going to her for answers. And something that I get a lot from people who are deconstructing, and this was my personal experience, but I didn't know how many people shared this until I started talking to them, is that the first thing they notice about people who have deconstructed, or people who don't consider themselves religious, maybe they're spiritual, maybe they're atheist, maybe they're agnostic, is they will ask the person a question, and the person who is a non-religious will say, I don't know, actually, great question. And they're like, are you allowed to say that? Like, wait. And I noticed that a lot of evangelical and fundamentalist churches have to have an answer for everything. And I remember in like a high school psychology class that I took, we watched a video where this like human lie detector, he worked for the FBI for like 20 years. He said one of the number one ways you can tell somebody is lying is because they have an answer for everything. He's like, if you ask somebody who didn't do anything bad tonight, like, hey, where'd you go? It's like, oh, I went out. It's like, oh, I got like crackers and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, what kind of crackers? Peanut butter? Somebody who's lying will say, well, first I went to the store, and then I like spent so much time walking around the aisles looking for peanut butter because like they moved it, like it wasn't in the spot where it was. Their story is like so detailed.
Right.
And I remember hearing that. And when I first started to deconstruct, I was like, does that mean that they're like maybe not telling me the truth about everything? Because they always have an answer, no matter how many layers of questions you ask on top of that, they always have an answer. And then when they get to the point where they don't, they tell you, read your Bible and you'll get your answer. Just turn to God, just pray and you'll get your answer. And so I thought that was so interesting that you said that up top without even like having discussed that with you prior. You're like, she always had an answer for everything. And so when you both, and this could be an independent question, maybe you've talked about this to one another, when you both think about the end, right? Like eventually human beings, we pass away. What do you think happens to us, to our souls, if we have them? What do you think that's like? If you had to guess, what do you think happens to us at the end?
Go first.
I want you to go first.
Okay. So I don't know. But
Liar.
I would imagine that, if there is a God in a heaven, then I think we're going to be really surprised at all the people that are there. I think that if there is a God and it is a God who loves his creation and all that, as a father, no matter what my kids do, I would never make them burn, not only burn to death, but not die and keep burning, because they need to suffer forever with no redemption possibility. Like, it doesn't make any sense to me. So if there is a God, I don't believe that there is a hell. And I believe that we'll be up there with a whole bunch of people that a lot of Christians would be surprised to see there. Outside of that, I feel like, I talked about how I believe we're all kind of connected, and I really believe a lot of the things that, as we've deconstructed, we've explored other things, and a lot of things that we've looked at. Energy is a big thing, and so that explains the connectedness that we have with each other. But also, I think it's very possible that we could just return to that, and conscious or not. And I would hope that we would be conscious and be able to, I don't know, just be able to just learn more about how the chocolate's made, how the whole thing works. But anyway, that's my answer.
You're like, what are all of the ingredients to Dr. Pepper? I really need to know. I really need to
No.
know all of them. Somebody's got to have the answer up here.
23. That's right.
Yeah. And what happened to Dr. Pepper 10? Because it was delicious and then they stopped making it. I don't understand. They got me hooked and then they stopped making it. And then Jenna, do you feel the same way, or do you have a different idea? What are your thoughts?
So once again, like I fully subscribe to, I don't know, and this is just my special little warm belief about how things work, that is grounded solely in like my own experiences and whatnot.
Yeah.
And thinking through things like where Jonathan was like, that if there's a God, there's surely going to like understand that in, if we go for the age of accountability between like 13 and 70, if you didn't figure it out between then, doesn't equate to thousands, millions, billions, trillions of years of suffering because of 70 years of not figuring it out.
Right.
Especially because we'll get on my like whatever.
Yeah.
My little train, my thing. Especially if you say, oh, well, someone, if you think about someone who is mentally ill. So if someone is doing bad things, you're going to go, well, they're clearly not right in the head. Okay. So you're going to tell me that a all-powerful, all-knowing God knows this person isn't right in the head, and that's why they've done these things, and they're still going to put them to hell? Like,
Right. He's omniscient and omnipotent. So he
Right.
knows what you're going to do before you do it, and then still lets you do it, and then still decides to punish you for it.
right. Knowing that you could not choose any better, you didn't know. And depending on which like Calvinist or whatever, like there's the whole predestined, like, well, he predestined all these people to burn just to show how whole, like, no, not that.
Yeah.
It's like what is it? David Hart?
David Bentley Hart.
David Bentley Hart. He says
He's a great theologian.
Oh yeah, it's great. We love listening to his podcasts and different things.
He rips people up like theologically. It's
What's his name? I gotta write this down.
David
Bentley Hart.
And he's very cerebral, but let me tell you, his burns, like he cuts deep.
He doesn't sugarcoat anything.
No.
He's just like, this is what I think, and if you believe a certain way, then you're just dumb.
Yeah, it's dumb to believe any other way. It doesn't make any logical sense. And I'm like, you are correct, sir. And then I take notes for Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Right.
You're like, I am dumb. I am not worthy.
Right. One thing that he says is, he said, if it was possible to know for sure that there was a hell,
mm-hmm.
nobody would consciously
choose it
in their right mind choose to go there.
Right.
And so the fact that we are not able to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is means that we can't have all the information that we need in order to make a decision.
And that Christians say, well, it's apparent in nature. Okay, so if it is apparent in nature about God, and then they are actively choosing to go to hell, then they aren't in their right mind, because no one would choose eternal conscious torment in their right mind. Therefore, they weren't able to make that decision, and God wouldn't send them to hell because they weren't in their right mind. And he was like, do you see the logic here? And I was like, I do. Thank you, David.
Yes, absolutely. And also I'm of the opinion that if God is the biblical God that they describe, right? Because I know that a lot of people have a lot of different ideas on like what God might be or who they might be. And if God really is the book of Genesis, that God, and he truly wants us to save ourselves by believing in him and joining him in the kingdom of heaven, why has he not come down and shown us? Why does he not have a yearly gathering of human beings to be like, hey, here is a video of what hell is like, and here are the people in it. Here is what heaven is like. I've made copies for everyone on how to not go to hell. Like, here you go, right? Because, they say it's the free will. They say the reason an omnipotent and omniscient God would allow us to make the behaviors that we do and the decisions that we do is because it's about free will. But like you said, how can you truly call it free will when we don't have enough information to make an informed decision, right? When we don't have a research database that we can go to with evidence and videos and links and tutorials to show us the two options that we have. Like, how is that free will? Especially when you bring up a good point. You're like, look, nobody would consciously want to go there. They just wouldn't. And if they did, they're clearly not in their right mind.
Right. They're dead because no one's going to choose that kind of punishment. Like
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
I do think there is something more, like Jonathan was talking about energy. Energy isn't created or destroyed. We're going to go into science. And I have had, some unusual spiritual experiences. So I'm like, I believe there's more than this flesh.
Absolutely.
I had a friend who, before it was easy to get in contact with people, early 2000s, they moved to England, and I suddenly felt really distressed for them. And so I was calling everyone. I was like, I need to get a hold of them. I don't know why. I need to get a hold of them, and finally get a hold of them. And from the day I had been feeling distressed, their wife had been in labor, was like, they weren't sure if she was going to live or if the baby was going to live. It was like this 5-day ordeal. And they were like, how did you know? And I was like, yeah. We are all connected, and there's something more than this. So right. I don't know what that is. But because I do still believe in a God, we have a friend who calls it source. I love that. Like, I believe in source. I think that whatever it is good. I do think that God is good. And without having an explanation for suffering or any of that, I know there's something outside of us, and I think it's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I had a guest on in the past who wrote a book called Why We Believe in Gods. And he talks about the human brain and how it's developed, and how evolution has allowed us as human beings to necessitate that parental feeling in order to survive. And so I think the idea that people believe in God is not far-fetched at all. And the idea that there is something out there that people truly feel is like watching over them, or creating something, or sending some kind of energy, right? Like I rarely meet anybody who identifies as having deconstructed that has all the answers. But I think there are a million reasons for different beliefs and a million different directions you can go. And I've yet to meet anybody who I'm like, no, they're wrong. They're absolutely wrong. That's just not it. That's just garbage. And so that makes perfect sense to me. I said all that to say that makes perfect sense. And I think what you're saying is it honestly, it makes way more sense than the Christian Bible, than the biblical, like Old Testament version of what we're supposed to think God is. And so we talked a little bit, Jenna, in your episode about your D.I.D, your dissociative identity disorder. And so do you think if you had stayed in your church, if you had stayed devout in the church where you met, or something similar to it, do you think that the way that you approach this, I almost struggle to call it a disorder, because it seems to have brought so much intrigue and joy to you in terms of kind of exploring it. So I almost feel bad calling it a disorder. I'll just call it D.I.D. Do you think that would have been handled differently? Do you think you would feel differently about it? Do you think the two of you would have handled it differently? Or would it have been frowned upon? What are your thoughts when you think about how that's changed for you?
I think that had I not deconstructed my ideas on hell, I would have had a much harder time, because as I met alters with different sexualities, and I hadn't like needing to grapple with that. If hell is on the table, then that is a life or death grappling.
Right.
So I think I would have had a lot harder time accepting the different parts of myself.
And they each have different beliefs about God and the universe, and
that would have been a lot harder too. Like, oh no, like, am I going to hell because J.A. believes this? Like,
right.
It would have been very difficult. As it was hard enough knowing that I couldn't share with the church, the people who, when you're struggling, like, please pray for me. Like, I'm having a hard time. Like, I was going through some of the hardest things that I had ever gone through. And this support, this family was not a safe place to go to. And so that was difficult, and probably did contribute to it being easier to walk away.
And it almost seems like it would have been all on you to decide. For example, you have I know you mentioned you had like a lesbian personality, and these people seem very real to you. They exist. They are here. They just aren't here all the time. And so then you think, is only that part of my spirit going to hell? How does that work? Is only like, if I'm me 85% of the time, is that enough to get into heaven? Right. So I can absolutely see how that would be very complicated. And then you think, okay, so then when I am experiencing heaven or hell, who am I experiencing it as? Like, whose sins am I being judged on when all of these people are within the same system, right? Within the same, I remember that. I remember system. Because I was thinking about that after I talked to you. I was like, how does that work? That's so frightening, especially because there's no way anybody would have had a solid answer for you. So maybe you're going to church every single day and it's meaning nothing because that identity is a lesbian, the end.
Right. Well, they do have a solid answer because they tell me all the time on social media that I'm demon possessed and that I need to repent. Like, look, no, I can say the magic words, Jesus is Lord. Therefore, I am not demon possessed because that's how the formula works, right? Like, so I'm not demon possessed. Try again. But they go, nope, you're definitely demon possessed. So then if I hadn't deconstructed hell, for sure, it would be like, okay, so now what? Like, I can't control them. Like, I can't control JA. Goodness knows I can't control her. Like Anthony, like they do their own thing. So then am I guilty or responsible for the things that they do while they're out?
Right.
As someone who's like Dimmy, I had never struggled with like the lust of the eyes thing. I didn't like oogle at people because that's just not how my brain works. But
our first kiss was on our wedding day. So,
yeah.
Right.
But Anthony comes out and Anthony's very attracted to men and like, ooh, so would I then be accountable for the fact that he was like, oh man, look at him. And then, but wait, how does that work? If he's gay, but he's in a female body, is that okay? Like, yeah.
Right.
There's no, they don't have an answer for it. And it's that's why they keep going, nope, you're just demon possessed. That's what that is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Not repeated childhood trauma that has caused this. Nope.
Because they got to have an answer.
Yes.
Right. We have an answer, and none of those answers are that we traumatized you. So figure it out. Good luck.
Right.
Here's a book that's very confusing. I hope it works out for you. Right. Yeah. I saw a TikTok once that said, try to live your life like you would have been burned at the stake 300 years ago. And that was like the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh, they just would have burned you at the stake. They would have been like, this is confusing. We don't have an answer. She's a witch. She's a witch. It's like, or is she just fun and interesting? Is she just, I don't know. She seems just fun to me, guys. You're getting a little Debbie Downer over here.
Oh no, for sure. For my nerdness is before the neurodivergence, because I agree with you. Like, yes, it was disordered when like at the beginning and I needed all the therapy. And now that we're working together well as a system, like it's a neurodivergence, it's adaptive. Like,
right.
I'm not suffering. But aside from that, like, because I'm a nerd and I like foraging and mushrooms, I'm like, oh, for sure. They would have been like, this woman knows too much. And off to the stake with me.
She looks like she's about to make a potion. Let's get rid of her. Let's get rid of her.
What were you gathering? Oh, this one's called Old Man's Beard and this is Burner.
Get it. I don't know. Get rid of her. Well, and the interesting thing to me is I wonder if within such a strict religion, you never would have really been allowed to let these individuals out, that it probably would have continued to be a disorder and an upset. Because after our interview, I was talking to my boyfriend about the things we talked about. And I said, what was so interesting is that when you talked about these people, these personalities, you were so happy to tell me about them. Like, you had such a pleasant experience telling me about them. And then when you told me about the way that Jonathan treats these individuals and the way that you guys navigate together, it was like you were telling me about your children. It was like you were telling me about this pride that you had. And I just don't see that existing if you're in a world that is constantly telling you you are flawed, even though God makes us perfect and he doesn't make mistakes. You're flawed, you're demonic. It is a you problem for you to figure out. And then you think, if it really is free will, you can't control who comes out when, right? Or maybe you can now, but you couldn't at one point. is that true free will, right? Is that truly free will when you realize later that this other individual has done sinful things? How is that free will? It's just so, there's so many layers. It's like an onion. There's just so many layers. But I feel like in the life you live now, it's more of like a flower. Like there's layers and there's petals and there might be a bee in there. You got to be careful, but like it's so much different than what it would have been in this former life. And just the way that you talk about it is so interesting and so enlightening. Do you find that you mentioned you have children, right? Two. That's wonderful. Do you find that your deconstruction journey has changed how you parent? How were they young when you left? Were they even born when you left? How has that changed how you raise your kids?
Big time it's changed our
Oh
parenting
yeah,
approach.
they're 13 and 15, so they were raised in the church and in that evangelical culture, and so
Until right until the oldest was 12 or 13, because
Yeah,
it was
oldest.
getting to youth group time, and I was
Right.
like, oh, that can be a little scary. And then we were just like, no, we're good.
Yep. So around 12 or 13 for the oldest and 10 or 11 for the youngest. And so I think it happened at the right time where
Right.
it's kind of neat because they saw that whole side of it.
Mhm.
And now they're seeing a different side of it. And it's like, even our kids kind of come up with different beliefs than, like, our
Mhm.
youngest believes different than our oldest, and they both believe different than we do. And so I think it's just beautiful because we are in a position where, since we're not afraid everybody's going to hell if they don't believe exactly the right thing, we're of a place where we can hold all this loosely and we can go, well, what about this?
Yeah.
And be really comfortable with it. And we can also be comfortable with our kids kind of feeling all that out and not being scared for them, or it's just a beautiful thing, I think.
The oldest is like, I might be an atheist. And I was like, cool.
Okay.
Like, that makes plenty of sense. And the only reason I'm not is because I've had experiences that inform me otherwise. If I didn't have these experiences, I'd probably be on the train with you. Like, but I think we're also gentler parents because we're not being told things like, spare the rod and spoil a child. And if they make mistakes, it's not their eternal souls. It's like, oh, well, everyone makes mistakes. And as a matter of fact, the only way that humans learn is by failure. So that's totally cool. Like, you're just learning.
And the blind obedience, like,
Oh goodness,
church
yes.
asked us to have blind obedience, and we therefore ask our kids to have blind obedience, where, you just need to do this because this is what I want you to do.
Yes.
And so it's really changed our perspective on a lot of that. And it's been hard because sometimes you're still kind of in that, and it's old habits die hard. So
goodness knows the youngest likes to debate the validity of the things that we ask him to do.
All the time.
Like, all right, it's time to do this. Well,
Why?
Is it time to do that because of this? Or what if I do it this way? Like, will that still? And I'm like,
you're like, listen here, I'm trying to be a gentle parent and you're making it real hard.
Yeah.
You're making it real hard. Yeah.
In some ways it's easier when the expectation is that they just need to do what you say and not talk back, not question it, not whatever,
Yeah.
But it's much better this way.
yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And do they ever ask you about that former life? Do they ever say like, hey, what was up with that? Or I remember this, or are they just kind of cool with, did they just kind of follow you where you went and that's enough for them?
We've brought it up to them.
And then if we pass it, they'll be like, oh, I remember when we went to church there.
Well, and also like just in the ways that we parent, like we talked to our youngest just the other day, and we were like, because I saw a TikTok that somebody was talking about like things that their parents had done and said and how that impacted them in their life and all that. And I saw myself in some of those things that they said that their parents did to them.
Yeah.
So we sat down with my youngest the other day, and we're just like, we're just sorry. We're sorry that was wrong. We're trying to do better. Be patient with us.
Mhm.
None of us make it out without therapy.
Yeah.
So
Right.
None of us should anyway. Like,
Yes.
so it's something where we're just know that we're doing the best we can, and that we're open to hearing when we do something wrong. Please tell us.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's amazing. And what was their response to that? Did they just say, okay?
Yeah, he's kind of reserved, so he's just like, okay.
mhm.
That's awesome. And I feel like that's a core memory forming right there, is like your parents apologizing to you and explaining, why they're sorry they did something. That's amazing.
I hope so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even, like, so the other day, Jonathan did something that made him mad, and it was a misunderstanding between the two. It wasn't even like, it was just they misunderstood each other. And so he comes in later, because I got to hear the story, and I was like, hey, you might want to tell this story to your dad. Let's have some communication here. And so Jonathan was like, oh, I'm sorry, like that's not how I thought it went. Like, will you forgive me? And the youngest was like, no, but like we can go ahead and go do, we were going to have some family time together. And even that, where there doesn't have to be a lecture. Well, you have to forgive because the Bible says to forgive. And if you don't forgive, you won't be forgiven. Like, no, he can have his feelings. Like, it's fine.
Yeah. Have fun in hell, son. That's all I can say. It's like, have fun. Lord says to forgive. So that's on you, man.
Yeah,
Yep.
eternity is a long time I tried.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Man, I have had just the most wonderful conversation with the two of you. I think you are a fantastic couple. I think if you don't already have a podcast, I think you should have one, because I just the way you guys interact with each other, like the minute the camera came on, the energy was just there. I was like, oh, this is going to be a good time. Like, this is going to be so fun. But was there any last message you could give to somebody who maybe they're currently deconstructing and they're not quite sure what to do? Maybe they have already decided they are no longer wanting to be involved in the church, but they don't really know where to go from here. What advice would you give?
I would say, so one of the things that really helped me was we had actually at our church, we had a guest speaker, Stan Mitchell, who is
Phenomenal.
from Nashville. He used to there used to be I don't remember the name of the church, but a large church that he was pastor of, and he came out as affirming, and a lot of the members left. But he was talking to us and saying that even the disciples, like even the early church, changed as they were going. Things changed, and so like
beliefs.
they updated their beliefs.
Yeah.
So
in scripture too, where like the church said this, and then in Acts here they changed and said this, and then here they changed.
Yeah. And even like recently, like within the past 100 years, there was like you couldn't wear makeup or pants or play cards or whatever, and you couldn't dance. But all those things have progressed. But at some point, the church with basically beliefs of what the Bible says about certain things, they were just like, okay, we're no longer going to grow in our faith. And he said, that Jesus, when he went up to heaven, that he said that he was leaving the Holy Spirit to continue to just reveal things to us and show us. And so regardless of how we think about all those things, I think there's still truth there, where we're supposed to listen to each other. We're supposed to just really just kind of ponder and think on things, and we're supposed to progress. If we stop progressing and we just lock it in at some place, I think that's the worst thing we can do. And so I think no matter where people are on their deconstruction journey, if they're just beginning to have certain rubs or doubts, or if they're way on the other end where they don't think any of it's real, I think as long as you don't just lock it down and say, this is the way it is. And I think at that point, no matter what you believe, you're no better than where you were before, because that's where we were before, is this is what we believe, and there's no changing it. And so I think there should always be room to just kind of discover new things and just rethink, kind of the way things are done or the way things are looked at.
That's such a good point. That's such a good point. Like being locked into like fundamentalist Christianity is no better than being locked into atheism. You can't change my mind. You can't show me. I'm not going to learn anything. This is it. That's an amazing point. And I've never heard it put that way. Thank you for that. That's awesome. That's awesome. Anything else? Any final words or anything?
I think that when it comes down to it, we all know what's important, and regardless of belief, it is caring for one another. Like, and that's where Jonathan was like, I think Jesus's message is still a good message. Like,
Yeah,
it's still that we need to love one another and care for one another, and to share with those in need. And if people are in the beginning of their deconstruction journey and they're very afraid, because that's how we all are, like, oh my God, what's happening?
yeah,
If you believe that God is love, then so long as love is there, God is there, and you're not on the wrong track. And it's
Yeah.
okay. So long as you can be afraid, just so long as there's love, you're okay.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I feel like this last like 5 minutes has just had so much wisdom from you guys in it. This is just amazing. Well, thank you so much for your opinions, your story, your wisdom, your honesty. I tell people all the time who didn't grow up religious, there is a bravery in admitting that you don't think the way that you were taught to think your whole life is the right way. And unless you've grown up in it, unless you've experienced it, it's just, you can't put into words how scary it can be. And so I just wanted to thank you both for your stories, for doing what you do, for spreading your joy through your actions and your relationship and your books. And I wish you all the best. And I hope your 2023 is just as magnificent as you guys are.
Well, thanks.
Yeah.
You too. Thanks for having us on. We really appreciate the opportunity.